The War of the Worlds, Chapter 1, by H.G. Wells. No one would have believed, in the last years of the 19th century, that human affairs were being watched, keenly and closely, by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. But as men busied themselves about their affairs, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope would scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply on a drop of water. With infinite complacency, men went to and fro over the globe about their little affairs, serene in their assurance of their empire over matter. It's possible that the infusoria under the microscope do the same. No one gave a thought to the older worlds of space as a source of human danger, or thought of them only to dismiss the idea of life upon them as impossible or improbable. It is curious to recall some of the mental habits of those departed days. At most, terrestrial men fancied there might be some other men upon Mars, perhaps inferior to ourselves and ready to welcome a missionary enterprise. And yet, across the gulf of space, minds that are to our minds as ours are to those of the beasts that perish, intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes, and slowly and surely they drew their plans against us. And early in the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment. The planet Mars, I scarcely need remind you, revolves around the Sun at a mean distance of 140 million miles, and the light and heat it receives from the Sun is barely half of that received by our world. It must be, if the nebular hypothesis has any truth, older than our world, and long before the Earth ceased to be molten, life upon its surface must have begun to run its course. The fact that it's scarcely 1/7 the volume of the Earth must have accelerated its cooling to the temperature at which life could begin. It has air and water and all that's necessary for the support of animate existence. And yet so vain is man, so blinded by his vanity, that no writer up until the very end of the 19th century expressed any idea that intelligent life may have developed there, far or indeed at all beyond its earthly level. Nor was it generally understood that, since Mars is much older than our Earth, with scarcely a quarter of its superficial area, and remoter from the Sun, it necessarily follows that it's not only more distant from life's beginning, but nearer its end. The secular cooling that must someday overtake our planet has already gone far indeed with our neighbour. Its physical condition is still largely a mystery, but we know now that even in its equatorial region, the midday temperature barely approaches that of our coldest winters. Its air is much more attenuated than ours. Its oceans have shrunk until they cover but a third of the surface, and as its slow seasons change, huge snow caps gather and melt around either pole, periodically inundating its temperate zones. That last stage of exhaustion, which to us is possibly still incredibly remote, has become a present-day problem for the inhabitants of Mars. The immediate pressure of necessity has brightened their intellects, enlarged their powers, and hardened their hearts. And looking across space, with instruments and intelligences such as we have scarcely dreamt of, they see at its nearest distance, only 35 million miles sunward of them, a morning star of hope, our own warmer planet, green with vegetation and blue with water, with a cloudy atmosphere eloquent of fertility, with glimpses of its drifting cloud wisps of broad stretches of populous country and narrow navy-crowded seas. And we men, the creatures who inhabit this earth, must be to them at least as alien and lowly as are monkeys and lemurs to us. The intellectual side of man already admits that life is an incessant struggle of existence, and it would seem too this is the belief of the minds of Mars. Their world is far gone in its cooling, but this world is still crowded with life, however crowded only with what they regard as inferior animals. To carry war sunward is indeed their only escape from destruction that generation upon generation creeps ever onward upon them. And before we judge of them too harshly, you must remember what ruthless and utter destruction our own species has wrought, not only upon animals, such as the vanished bison and the dodo, but upon our own races. The Tasmanians, in spite of their humanity, were entirely swept out of existence in a war of extermination waged by European immigrants in the space of just 50 years. Are we such apostles of mercy as to complain if the Martians war against us in the same spirit? The Martians seem to calculate their descent with amazing subtlety. Their mathematical learning is evidently far in excess of ours, and have carried out their preparations with a well-nigh perfect unanimity. Had our instruments permitted it at the time, we may have seen them gathering trouble far back in the 19th century. Men like Schiaparelli watched the Red Planet. It is odd, by the by, that for countless centuries Mars has always been the star of war, but they failed to interpret the fluctuating appearance of its markings they mapped so well. All that time, the Martians were getting ready. During the opposition of 1894, a great light was seen on the illuminated part of the disk, first at the Lick Observatory, then by Periton of Nice, then by other observers. English readers heard of it first in the issue of Nature, dated August 2nd. I'm inclined to think that the appearance may have been the casting of the huge gun, the vast pit sunk into the planet from which their shots are fired at us. Peculiar markings that are as yet unexplained were seen at the site of that outbreak during the next two oppositions. The storm burst upon us 6 years ago now. As Mars approached opposition, Lavelle of Java set the wires of the astronomical community palpitating with the amazing intelligence of a huge outbreak of incandescent gas upon the planet. It had occurred towards midnight of the 12th of August, and the spectroscope, to which he had once restored, indicated a large mass of flaming gas, chiefly hydrogen, moving with enormous velocity towards Earth. The jet of fire became invisible around 12:15. He compared it to a colossal puff of flame, suddenly and violently scourging out the planet, as flaming gas would rush out the barrel of a gun. A singularly appropriate phrase it proved. And yet the next day there was nothing of it in the papers, except for a small footnote in the Daily Telegraph, and the world went on in ignorance of one of the gravest dangers that have ever threatened the human race. I myself may not have heard of the eruption at all, had I not met Ogilvy, a well-known astronomer at Ottershaw. He was immensely excited at this news, and in excess of his feelings invited me to take a turn with him that night in the scrutiny of the Red Planet. In spite of everything that's happened since, I can still remember the vigil very distinctly. The black, silent observatory, the shadowed lantern that threw a feeble glow upon the floor in the corner, the ticking of the clockwork in the telescope, a small slit in the wooden roof, an oblong profundity with stardust streaked across it. Ogilvy moved around, invisible but audible. Looking through the telescope, you could see a circle of deep blue and little round planets swimming in the field. It seemed such a little thing, so bright and small and still, faintly marked with transverse stripes and slightly flattened from a perfect round. But so little it was, so silvery warm, a pinhead of light. It was like it quivered a little, but this was just the telescope vibrating the activity of the clockwork kept the planet in view. As I watched, the star grew larger and smaller, seeming to advance and recede, but that was simply that my eye was getting tired. 40 million miles that was from us. More more than 40 million miles of void. Few people realize the immensity of the vacancy which the dust of the material universe swims. Near it in the field, I remember, were 3 little points of light, 3 telescopic stars infinitely remote, and all around it was the unfathomable darkness of empty space. You know how that blackness looks on a frosty starlit night? In a telescope it seems far more profound, and invisible to me because they were so remote and small, flying swiftly and steadily towards me across that incredible distance, drawing nearer every minute by so many thousands of miles, came the thing they were sending us. The thing that would bring so much struggle and calamity and death to the earth. I never dreamt of it as I watched. No one on Earth dreamt of that unerring missile. That night too, there was another jet of gas from a distant planet. I saw it. A reddish flash at the edge, the slightest projection of an outline. Just the chronometer struck midnight. At that I told Ogilvy and he took my place. The night was warm. I was thirsty, and I went, stretching my legs clumsily and feeling my way through the darkness, to the little table where the siphon stood, while Ogilvy exclaimed at the streamer of gas coming towards us. That night, another missile started on its way to the Earth from Mars, just a second or two under 24 hours after the first. I remember how I sat on the table there in the darkness, patches of green and crimson swimming before my eyes. I wished I had a light to smoke by, little suspecting the meaning of the minute gleam I'd just seen, and all the horrors that would presently bring me. Ogilvy watched till 1. Then he gave up. We lit the lantern and walked over to his house. Down below in the darkness were Ottershaw and Chertsey, and all their hundreds of people sleeping peacefully. He was full of speculation that night about the condition of Mars, but scoffed at the vulgar idea of its having inhabitants who were signalling us. His idea was that meteorites may be falling in heavy showers on the planet, or that a large volcanic explosion was in progress. He pointed out to me how unlikely it was that organic evolution had taken the same direction on 2 adjacent planets. The chances of anything man-like on the surface of Mars are 1,000,000 to 1, he said. Hundreds of observers saw the flame that night, and the night after, about midnight, and again the night after, and so on for 10 more nights. A flame each night. Why the shots ceased after the 10th no one knows, or has attempted to explain. And maybe the gases of the firing caused the Martians some inconvenience. Dense clouds of smoke or dust, visible through a powerful telescope on Earth as little grey fluctuating blobs, spread through the clearness of the planet's atmosphere, obscured its more familiar features. Even the daily papers woke up to these disturbances at last, and popular notes would appear here and there and everywhere concerning the volcanoes on Mars. The serial-comic periodical Punch, I remember, made a little happy use of it in the political cartoon. And, all unsuspected, those missiles the Martians fired at us kept drawing earthward, rushing now at a pace of many miles per second through the empty gulf of space, hour by hour, day by day, nearer and nearer. It seems to me now almost incredibly wonderful that, with that swift fate hanging over us, men could go about their petty concerns like they did. I remember how jubilant Markham was at securing a new photograph of the planet for the paper he worked for in his days. People in these latter times scarcely realize the abundance and enterprise of the 19th century papers. For my own part, I was much occupied in learning how to ride a bicycle, and busy upon a series of papers discussing the probable developments of moral ideas as civilization progressed. One night, the first missile could scarcely have been 10 million miles away by this point. I went for a walk with my wife. Starlight, and I explained the 9 signs of the zodiac to her, pointing out Mars, a bright dot of light creeping zenithward, towards which so many telescopes are currently pointed. It was a warm night, Coming home, a party of excursionists from Chertsey are with pastors singing and playing music. There were lights in the upper windows of the houses, and people went to bed. From the railway station, in the distance, came the sound of shunting trains, ringing, rumbling, softened almost into a melody by the distance. My wife pointed out to me the brightness of the red, green, and yellow signal lights hanging in a framework against the blue sky. It all seemed so safe and tranquil.